humiliated at her wedding. But what a stranger did left everyone speechless. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to today's story and meet our main character. Clara Wynn had always imagined her wedding day as the beginning of a quiet forever. The chapel was glowing that morning, sunlight spilling through stained glass windows, painting soft colors on the marble floor. Rows of white roses lined the aisle, the air thick with the scent of vanilla candles and lilac perfume. The guests whispered, smiling, phones discreetly ready to capture her perfect moment. She stood there in lace and trembling hope, her hands clutching the bouquet her mother had tied with a silk ribbon. Every breath felt like a prayer. Outside, the church bells rang once, then twice, echoing across the Savannah waterfront. But the man she was supposed to marry, Theo, did not come. At first, people thought he was late. Someone joked softly that the groom might be fixing his tie. Laughter rippled, polite but uneasy. Then the heavy oak doors swung open, and it was not Theo. It was Megan, Clara's best friend, wearing a tight beige dress that revealed a small curve of pregnancy beneath her coat. A hush swept through the hall like a cold wind. Cameras lifted. Every heartbeat seemed to stop. Behind her, Theo appeared, face pale, hands shaking as he took Megan's hand. His voice cracked as he spoke, loud enough for the microphones to catch every word. "I cannot do this," he said. "I cannot lie anymore. Megan is pregnant, and I am going to be with her." The words hit harder than a physical blow. Clara felt her knees weaken. The bouquet slipped from her fingers and scattered across the marble. Gasps turned into whispers, whispers into the cruel buzz of excitement. Someone laughed short, nervous, vicious. Another guest raised a phone higher, recording every second of her collapse. The sound of murmuring grew louder. "Poor girl," someone said. "She should have seen it coming," another voice replied. That is what happens when you trust too easily. Their judgment cut deeper than the betrayal itself. Clara's father looked away, ashamed, powerless. The officiant closed his book, uncertain whether to stay or leave. And there she stood, 25 years old, humiliated in her own white dress, a living exhibit of heartbreak for the entire world to see. Her chest ached with something beyond pain. It was exposure, the kind that strips a person of dignity, the kind that does not end when the moment ends because it will live forever in videos, in whispers, in the cruel memory of strangers. Tears blurred her vision as she turned toward the exit, desperate to escape the stairs. But the noise only grew louder, clicks of cameras, murmurs of pity, laughter that felt like nails scraping against glass. And then, through the noise, one sound broke it all, the scrape of a chair across the floor. Everyone turned. A tall man rose from the last row, dressed in a dark navy suit. He was not family, not a friend, but his presence silenced the room instantly. His name was Adrian Cole, though most guests only recognized the face from magazine covers and charity galas. His left hand bore a faint scar along the knuckles, the kind that hinted at stories no one dared to ask about. He walked forward slowly, every step echoing in the stunned air. His eyes never left Clara. When he spoke, his voice was steady, low, and commanding. "That is enough," he said. "No one here has the right to treat her like this." No one dared move. Even Theo lowered his head, guilt and fear mixing into the same expression. Adrian extended a hand toward the trembling bride. "Come with me, Miss Wynn." For a long moment, she hesitated. The whole world was watching the same world that had just laughed at her. But there was something in his tone that felt solid, like the ground she had lost. Clara reached out, her fingers barely grazing his. The crowd held its breath. And as she took his hand, the cameras flashed again, but this time they captured something different. Not a broken girl, a woman choosing to stand. The two of them walked down the aisle together, past every shocked face and every silent whisper. And in that walk, beneath the sound of echoing footsteps and shattered expectations, began a story no one in that room could have predicted. A story about scars, redemption, and the strange ways broken souls sometimes find each other. The chapel doors closed behind them with a heavy thud, sealing in the murmurs. the whispers, and the broken vows. Outside, the autumn air bit against Clara's skin. Her veil fluttered like a torn flag as she struggled to breathe. The parking lot was half empty now, sunlight sharp on the chrome of luxury cars. Her hands trembled, still clinging to Adrian's sleeve as if it were the last solid thing in her world. He led her away from the crowd's eyes, down the side steps to a quiet courtyard shaded by oak trees. The fountain there was dry, its stone basin cracked by time. Adrian stopped, letting her catch her breath. She did not look at him. She only stared at the ground, at the white petals scattered like snow around her shoes. "Why did you do that?" she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, small. "You do not even know me." Adrian hesitated. The scar on his hand caught the sunlight as he rubbed it once, as though grounding himself. "Because someone needed to," he said simply. "And because I know what it feels like to be left standing alone." That answer broke something inside her. Tears came again, silent this time, slipping through her lashes. He took off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders without a word. It was warm, smelling faintly of cedar and rain. For a moment, she felt human again, not a headline, not a victim, just a person who was cold and tired. "I should go," she murmured after a long silence. "The photographers will follow soon. They always do." Adrian nodded. "Then come with me, just for a while. I will drive you somewhere safe." Every instinct screamed against trusting a stranger. But something in his tone, in the steady quiet of his eyes, told her he meant it. And really, what did she have left to lose? Minutes later, his black car rolled out of the church parking lot, leaving behind a swirl of petals and flashing lights. Inside the car, silence sat heavy between them. Clara kept her gaze fixed on the passing trees, the world blurring through her tears. Adrian drove with both hands on the wheel, the faint lines of old burns visible beneath his cuff. She noticed but did not ask. He noticed her notice, but he did not explain. After several miles, he pulled into a small roadside diner, one of those places that smelled like coffee, pancakes, and old stories. The bell above the door jingled softly as they entered. A waitress looked up, surprised at the sight of a woman in a torn wedding dress and a man in a tailored suit. Adrian spoke quietly, ordering 2 cups of black coffee and a slice of apple pie. Clara sat in the booth, her hands around the steaming mug, feeling the warmth seep into her bones. The world outside moved on as if nothing had happened, cars passing, a radio humming, a child laughing somewhere beyond the window. "You said you knew what it feels like," she finally said, "to be left standing alone." Adrian's eyes lifted to hers. For the first time, the calm surface broke. "5 years ago," he said, "I was supposed to get married. A week before the ceremony, the building I was working in collapsed. I pulled 3 people out. The 4th, I could not save. That scar," he turned his hand over, "is from that day. She could not look at me after that. Said she saw the dead in my eyes." Clara's lips parted, but no words came. The weight in his voice was not bitterness, it was memory. Heavy, real. "I disappeared for a while after that," he continued quietly. "Sold the company, stopped answering calls. I learned that sometimes survival is its own kind of shame." For a long time, neither spoke. The sound of a coffee machine filled the silence, steady as a heartbeat. Clara pushed her cup aside. "I thought I was the only one who lost everything today," she said softly. He shook his head. "Sometimes you do not lose everything," he said. "You just lose the part that was never meant for you." Something in her chest loosened a knot she had been holding since the moment Theo's confession shattered her world. She looked at him, really looked, at the man whose quiet steadiness had cut through her chaos. "Thank you," she said, almost whispering. He gave a small nod. "No thanks needed, but I should take you somewhere you can rest. Do you have family nearby?" Clara hesitated. "My mother passed 2 years ago. My father lives in another state. I will figure something out." Adrian studied her for a moment, then said, "There is a small inn near the river. Clean, quiet. I can pay for a room tonight. No strings attached." She wanted to refuse out of pride, but exhaustion won. "Just one night," she said. "Just one night," he echoed. They left the diner as the sky turned gold. The wind lifted the hem of her dress, carrying the faint scent of coffee and hope. Behind them, the waitress whispered to another server, "Did you see that? She looked like she ran out of a wedding." Neither of them looked back. As the car merged onto the highway, the sun dipped low, painting the windshield in amber light. Clara leaned her head against the glass. eyes half closed. Adrian glanced at her reflection in the window, the broken bride slowly falling asleep. He tightened his grip on the wheel, as if silently promising that, for tonight at least, she would be safe. Outside, the world moved on, unaware that two strangers, one scarred, one shattered, had just crossed paths in the kind of moment that quietly rewrites a life. The inn stood on the edge of the river like an old photograph. Its wooden sign swayed softly in the evening wind, and the porch light glowed amber against the falling dusk. The air smelled faintly of rain and pine, a sharp contrast to the heavy perfume and camera flashes that had filled Clara's morning. Adrian parked the car in front of the entrance and stepped out first. He circled around to open her door, an old-fashioned courtesy that caught her off guard. Her fingers hesitated on the seatbelt before she finally released it. The lace on her dress had torn at the hem, brushing against her ankles as she stepped into the cool night air. "I will handle the check-in," he said quietly. His tone was calm, steady, almost protective. Clara followed him inside, her heels clicking softly against the wooden floor. The lobby was small but warm stone fireplace, plaid armchairs, a soft hum of country music from an old radio behind the counter. The innkeeper, an older woman with kind eyes, looked up and paused. Her gaze flicked from Clara's disheveled wedding gown to Adrian's tailored suit. "Rough night?" she asked gently. Adrian gave a faint, polite smile. "Something like that. 2 rooms, please." Clara felt a flicker of gratitude at the phrase 2 rooms. It meant boundaries, respect. It meant safety. The innkeeper handed over the keys without another question. "Room 4 and room 5. Hot water runs well, but the heater's slow. If you need tea, there is a kettle in the lounge." They climbed the narrow staircase, the wood creaking under each step. At her door, Adrian stopped and handed her the key. "You should rest. Lock the door, and if you need anything, I will be next door." She nodded, her voice low. "Thank you for all of this." "You do not owe me thanks," he said. "Just sleep. The world will look a little different in the morning." He turned toward his room, but she called softly after him. "Why are you doing this, really?" He paused at the threshold, hand on the doorknob. "Maybe because no one did it for me when I needed it most." Then he disappeared inside. Clara stood for a moment in the quiet hallway, his words hanging between them like smoke. When she finally entered her room, the air smelled faintly of lavender and old wood. She dropped the bouquet remnants onto the dresser, petals scattered, brittle and lifeless. In the mirror, her reflection looked like a ghost mascara streaked, veil torn, eyes hollow. She filled the sink with warm water and began to wash her face, the makeup melting away like a disguise she never wanted. When she looked up again, the woman staring back at her was not a bride anymore. Just Clara Wynn, no last name attached to a man who chose someone else. A soft knock came from the door. "Clara?" Adrian's voice was muffled through the wood. "The innkeeper made tea. Would you like some?" She hesitated, then opened the door halfway. He stood there, sleeves rolled, holding 2 mugs of steaming chamomile. "It helps," he said. "At least, it used to." She let him in. They sat near the window, the light from a single lamp spilling across the room. The river outside reflected the moon like silver thread, and the only sound was the quiet ticking of the wall clock. "I do not know how I am supposed to face everyone," Clara said, fingers wrapped around the mug. "The videos are probably everywhere by now. My phone keeps buzzing, but I cannot look." "You do not have to," he said. "Not tonight. But tomorrow?" She gave a weak laugh. "Tomorrow, I will be the joke of the week." Adrian looked at her, his eyes soft but unwavering. "Do you want to know what I did the day my life collapsed?" She nodded slowly. "I drove until I ran out of gas," he said. "Then I sat on the side of the road for hours. People passed by, pretending not to see me. I was still wearing my hospital coat, covered in dust, and for the first time in my life, I realized how invisible pain can be to others." Clara's throat tightened. "That sounds lonely." "It was," he said. "But it taught me something. People will stare at your fall, but they rarely stay to witness your rise. The ones who do that is where healing begins." She met his gaze, and for a heartbeat, the ache in her chest felt lighter. "And did you rise?" she asked softly. Adrian smiled faintly. "Eventually, but not alone." A long silence followed, comfortable and fragile at once. The river kept whispering outside, and somewhere in the distance, a train passed with a low hum. Clara sipped her tea, feeling the warmth spread through her hands. "I do not know if I can rebuild," she said. "Everything I had was tied to him, our apartment, our friends, even my job at his company. It all feels gone." "Then start with something small," he said. "A new job, a new place, something that belongs only to you." She looked at him curiously. "That sounds easy when you say it." "It never is," he admitted. "But you would be surprised how far small beginnings can go." "Oh." He stood up, placing his empty mug on the table. "Get some rest, Clara. You survived the worst part already. The rest is just healing." She wanted to ask how he knew that, but the words caught in her throat. He gave her one last nod and stepped into the hallway. When the door closed, the room felt both emptier and safer. Clara turned off the lamp and lay down on the bed. The sheets smelled clean, faintly floral. Through the thin curtains, she could see the river shimmer under the moonlight. For the first time since the morning, she let her eyes close without fear. Outside, the water kept moving, steady and patient, as if reminding her that even after the loudest storms, life keeps flowing forward. And in the next room, a man with a scar on his hand sat awake by the window, watching the same river, wondering why the sight of a broken bride had made him feel something he thought he had lost forever: hope. The first light of morning slid across the river and into Clara's room, soft and golden. For a moment, she did not remember where she was. The ceiling was wooden, the sheets smelled of lavender, and the silence was almost too gentle. Then it came back yesterday: the wedding, the betrayal, the stranger who had stepped in when the world turned cruel. Her eyes fell on the empty mug on the table, a faint ring of tea still inside. The memory of his voice echoed in her mind, steady, calm, unjudging. "You survived the worst part already." She wished she could believe it. She sat up, ran a hand through her tangled hair, and noticed that Adrian's jacket was still draped over the chair. She touched it lightly, tracing the faint scent of cedar that clung to the fabric. For reasons she could not name, it felt like a promise she was not ready to give back yet. Outside the window, she saw him by the car, speaking with the innkeeper. The early sun caught the scar on his hand again, pale against his skin. He looked composed, but there was a weight to his posture, something carried, not shown. A knock came at her door. "Breakfast is ready," Adrian said from the hallway. His voice carried that same quiet authority that had steadied her the day before. When she joined him downstairs, the dining area smelled of fresh coffee and pancakes. The innkeeper smiled as she poured them both orange juice. "You two make a lovely pair," she said kindly. Clara blushed, about to correct her, but Adrian simply thanked the woman with a polite nod. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Clara cut her pancakes into small pieces she never finished. The weight of everything unsaid hung between them. Finally, she broke it. "I will need to go back today," she said softly. "To the city. My things are still at the apartment." Adrian set down his fork. "You should not go alone." "Who?" "I cannot ask you to come with me," she said. "You are not asking," he replied. "I am offering." Something in his tone left no room for argument. It was not forceful, but protective, like he was used to stepping in when no one else would. Clara gave a small nod. "Just to the door," she said. "Nothing more." "Just to the door," he agreed. The drive back was quiet. The city rose on the horizon, steel and glass catching the Sunday. As they reached her apartment complex, the noise of reality returned: traffic, voices, and, most painfully, the buzz of her phone lighting up with missed calls and messages. She finally unlocked it. Hundreds of notifications flooded the screen: social media posts, photos from the wedding, cruel captions she could barely read. Her breath caught. "They recorded everything," she whispered. "I am everywhere now." Adrian pulled over and turned toward her. "Clara, look at me," he said firmly. "What they see online is a moment. It is not you. You decide what comes next, not them." She tried to steady herself, but the humiliation returned in waves. "Everyone I know will see this," she said, "even at work." "Then do not go back there," he interrupted gently. "You do not owe that place your shame." His words hung in the air, heavy but kind. She wanted to protest, to explain that she had nowhere else to go, but deep down, she knew he was right. That life, that version of herself, had ended the moment Theo said her name in front of all those cameras. They reached the building. Adrian stepped out first and helped her carry a small suitcase from the lobby. Inside the apartment, Everything looked the same but felt hollow, like a museum of a life that had already ended. On the kitchen counter lay the wedding invitation, still open, beside a bouquet that had begun to wilt. Clara picked up a framed photo of her and Theo, smiling under fairy lights. Her throat tightened, but instead of crying, she set it face down. "I will leave most of it," she said. "I do not need these reminders." Adrian glanced around quietly. "Do you have somewhere to stay after this?" She shook her head. "I was thinking about visiting my mother's garden in Fairhaven. It is a few hours south. I used to help her there before she got sick. It is overgrown now, but it feels honest." "Mb." He nodded slowly. "A garden sounds like a good place to start over." "I cannot pay for much," she said quickly. "I will find a bus." "I will drive you," he said. "Adrian." "It is not charity," he interrupted. "It is company. You can repay me by drinking that tea you left unfinished." She could not help but smile faintly. "You really do not take no for an answer, do you?" He smiled for the first time, a small curve that softened his face. "Only when I believe yes is better for someone." Oh. By noon, they were back on the road, the city shrinking behind them. The world beyond was quieter fields, wooden fences, long stretches of sky. Clara rested her head against the window, her wedding dress folded neatly in a box on the seat beside her. For the first time, the silence between them was not heavy. It felt like air light, breathable. She turned slightly toward him. "What do you do now?" she asked. "I used to run a medical company," he said. "Now I work on a different kind of healing. My foundation builds rehabilitation centers for trauma recovery. We use nature, art, and time as medicine." She looked at him, surprised. "That sounds peaceful." He shrugged lightly. "It keeps me human." She studied his profile, the faint scar catching the afternoon light, and realized how strange it was that a stranger could feel more real than the man she had loved for years. As the road curved toward the open countryside, Clara closed her eyes, letting the hum of the tires and the rhythm of his calm breathing lull her. For the first time since her world fell apart, the quiet no longer frightened her. Outside the window, the landscape unfolded into color fields of gold, tall grass swaying in the breeze, and the promise of something she could not yet name, a beginning. And for Adrian, watching her reflection in the glass, there was a quiet understanding that he was not just helping a broken woman. Somewhere between the silence and the miles, he was beginning to feel his own heart wake up again. The car kept moving south, carrying two people who had lost everything, unaware that the road ahead would not just lead them to a garden but to the place where healing and love would begin to take root. The sun was leaning low when they reached Fairhaven. The small town looked like it had been forgotten by time. Wooden fences lined the narrow road, and beyond them stretched rows of overgrown wildflowers that once had been a proud garden. The scent of soil and honeysuckle drifted through the open window as Adrian pulled the car to a stop beside an old white gate. Clara stepped out slowly, her shoes sinking into the grass. The garden lay before her, tangled but still alive. Roses climbed the fence in uneven bursts of red and pink, and the small shed her mother had built leaned slightly to one side. A faint breeze moved through the leaves, carrying memories with it. "I used to plant every spring with her," Clara said softly. "She said flowers grow better when you talk to them kindly. I did not understand then. Now I think she was teaching me something about people." Adrian closed the car door and walked beside her. "She sounds like she understood the quiet kind of love." "She did," Clara said. "When she got sick, I promised I would keep this place alive. But after she passed, I never came back. I could not bear it." Adrian looked around the garden, at the stubborn life that had kept growing without her. "You did not fail it," he said. "It waited for you." They spent the next hour clearing the path. He found an old shovel near the shed and began turning the dry soil, while she cut away vines that had strangled the rose bushes. Their hands grew dirty, and for the first time in days, Clara laughed a small, surprised sound that made Adrian glance up. "I forgot how good it feels to do something real," she said, wiping sweat from her brow. "Maybe that is why I build gardens for my foundation," he replied. "They remind people that healing is not instant. It grows slow but steady." "Oh, Godi." She looked at him, curiosity in her eyes. "You never told me why you started doing that." Adrian hesitated, leaning on the shovel handle. "After the accident, I spent months in hospitals that felt like prisons. Bright lights, cold walls, no air. I promised myself that if I ever built another medical space, it would breathe. It would feel like this." Clara's voice softened. And do you feel healed? He looked at the scar on his hand, flexed it once. Some days, he said. Other days, I just keep digging. Evening fell, and they sat on the old porch steps, the garden stretching before them in shades of gold and shadow. The first stars appeared overhead. Clara pulled her knees close, resting her chin on them. I do not know what tomorrow looks like, she said. But being here, it feels like I can finally breathe again. You do not need to know what comes next, Adrian said. You just need to let yourself exist without apology. The quiet between them was not empty anymore. It felt full of things neither could yet name. When they returned to town, they found a small cafe still open. The waitress, a cheerful woman with silver hair, served them soup and bread. You two just passing through? She asked with a smile. Clara hesitated. Adrian answered, We are rebuilding something that used to matter. The woman nodded knowingly, as if she understood without needing the story. Later that night, back at the inn, Clara stood on the balcony outside her room. The moon hung low, casting silver light over the garden in the distance. She heard the faint creak of the door next to hers and turned. Adrian stepped out onto his own balcony, holding 2 cups of tea. You are becoming predictable, she said softly. I will take that as progress, he replied. He passed her the cup across the railing. The warmth touched her fingers before the porcelain did. For a long moment, they stood in silence, the night air cool between them. Adrian, she said finally, when I was standing in that church, when everyone was staring at me, I thought my life had ended. But now, I am starting to wonder if it just began. He looked at her, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. That is how it works sometimes. Endings disguised as beginnings. She nodded, the tea steaming between her hands. If I start something here, help rebuild the garden, maybe open it for people who need peace, would you? She stopped, searching for the right words. Would I help you? He asked gently. She smiled faintly. Yes. I was going to ask before you did, he said. The foundation funds community gardens for recovery programs. We could make this one part of it, if that is what you want. Clara's breath caught, a mix of disbelief and gratitude. You would really do that? He nodded. I believe in places that give people back their voice. This garden can be that. The idea settled between them like light rain, soft, possible. For the first time, Clara felt the pull of something greater than her pain. Purpose. She looked out over the darkened horizon, her voice almost a whisper. My mother would have loved that. She always said flowers grow toward kindness. Adrian glanced at her, his tone quiet. Maybe people do too. End pros. The night deepened, but neither of them moved to go inside. Somewhere far off, an owl called, and the river whispered beyond the fields. Clara took a slow breath, feeling the ache in her chest ease just a little more. The garden had waited. The stranger had stayed. And in the silence between them, something fragile began to bloom, something neither dared name, but both could feel taking root. Tomorrow, they would return to the garden and begin again. Tonight, they simply stood together, 2 souls learning that sometimes healing begins not with answers, but with company. Morning came with the smell of wet soil and sunlight breaking through thin clouds. The garden looked different in the daylight. Where yesterday there had been ruin, now there was rhythm, 2 sets of footprints in the dirt, patches of cleared earth, a handful of new seedlings waiting for a chance. Clara arrived early, her hair tied back, wearing jeans and a borrowed flannel shirt from the innkeeper. Adrian was already there, sleeves rolled, a shovel in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. He looked up as she approached. You are early, he said. I could not sleep, she admitted. I kept thinking about what we talked about last night, about making this garden part of your foundation. He smiled faintly. Then let us start before the world finds a way to stop us. They worked side by side for hours. The sun rose higher, drying the dew from the leaves. Clara dug small holes while Adrian turned the heavier soil. Every few minutes, they would pause and trade quiet conversation about the flowers her mother had loved, about the patients who found peace in his gardens, about how strange it was to meet someone at their lowest and feel stronger because of it. At noon, they took a break under the shade of an old oak tree. Adrian handed her a bottle of water and a sandwich wrapped in paper. Do you ever think it is strange? She asked after a while. 2 days ago, I was supposed to marry someone I thought I knew. Now I am sitting here planting flowers with a man I met in the middle of a disaster. He looked out across the field, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. Life rarely gives you what you expect. It gives you who you need. Hebra. The words hung in the air, and Clara felt something stir quietly inside her. Not love, not yet, but a kind of peace she had not known in years. After lunch, a car pulled up near the gate. A woman stepped out, dressed in a light gray suit, holding a clipboard. Adrian stood to greet her. "Dr. Hart," he said. "Thank you for coming." Clara wiped her hands on her jeans, confused. Adrian turned toward her. "Clara, this is Dr. Elise Hart. She oversees community outreach for my foundation. I asked her to see what we can do here." Dr. Hart shook Clara's hand warmly. "I have heard a lot about your mother's garden," she said. "Adrian sent me photos this morning. It has great potential for a therapy site. You could host workshops, recovery programs, even children's art sessions." Clara blinked in surprise. "Children's sessions? That sounds beautiful, but I am not sure I could run something like that." Dr. Hart smiled. "You have already started. You cared enough to bring it back to life." As they spoke, Adrian watched quietly, his expression softening. For the first time since the accident years ago, he felt the same pulse of purpose he once had in the operating room, the sense that something broken could be made whole again. By late afternoon, plans had begun to take shape. They marked spots for benches, a walking path, and a small greenhouse. Clara's hands were blistered, but her heart felt lighter. When Dr. Hart left, she turned to Adrian. "You really think this can work?" "I do," he said, "but only if you believe it too." She nodded slowly, then looked down at the dirt beneath her nails. "You know," she said, "yesterday I was ashamed of being seen like this, dirty, tired, in clothes that do not match. But now I do not care. I feel real again." He smiled. "That is what healing looks like. It is not clean. It is honest." A light rain began to fall, soft and warm. Instead of running for cover, Clara lifted her face to the sky. The drops mixed with the soil on her skin, streaking down like watercolor. She laughed an open, unguarded sound that startled even her. Adrian watched her, and for a moment, time slowed. Her laughter echoed through the garden, through the sound of rain and rustling leaves. He felt the walls he had built for years begin to crack. When the rain stopped, they stood side by side, drenched but unbothered. Clara turned to him, her eyes bright. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. When this place opens, promise you will come back for the first bloom." He nodded. "Only if you promise to send me the first photo." "I will," she said, smiling, "even if it is just one flower." That evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Adrian received a call. He stepped away to answer it, his tone shifting from gentle to professional. "Yes, Dr. Patel. I understand. I will be there by morning." When he returned, Clara was sitting on the porch steps, watching the fireflies gather above the grass. "Everything all right?" she asked. He hesitated. "One of our centers in Atlanta had an emergency. I have to go tomorrow." Clara's smile faded slightly. "Of course. You have work to do." He looked at her for a long moment. "This is work, too," he said quietly. "Do not think I am walking away from it or from what we started." "I know," she said, though part of her was not sure. "You do not owe me anything, Adrian." He shook his head. "That is where you are wrong." The night deepened. They sat together one last time under the stars, the sound of the river steady in the distance. Neither spoke much. Words were no longer needed. When Clara finally went inside, Adrian stayed on the porch, his phone in his hand but his eyes on the garden. He thought of her laughter, of the way her hands had steadied when she worked the soil. He realized that for the first time in years, leaving felt hard. In the morning, the car would take him away, but the garden and the woman who had brought it back to life would stay. And deep down, he already knew he would return, not as a rescuer, but as a man who wanted to see what love could grow from the ground they had both begun to heal. Adrian left at dawn. The sound of his car faded long before Clara opened her eyes. Yet the house still carried his presence, his jacket folded on the chair, the faint smell of cedar and rain. For a moment, she stood at the window, watching the morning fog drift over the river, wondering if this was what it felt like to miss someone who had not really left you. The garden waited below, damp with dew, alive with promise. Clara tied her hair, slipped on her gloves, and stepped outside. Work filled the hours quickly, watering, pruning, planting new seedlings that Dr. Hart had delivered the evening before. Each movement grounded her, each small task replacing a little of the pain that once consumed her. Weeks passed quietly. News about the wedding scandal faded, buried beneath newer stories. The world had moved on, but Clara stayed rooted in soil, in silence, in a purpose that no one could take from her. By late summer, the garden had transformed. Rows of lavender rippled in the breeze, butterflies danced among marigolds, and the old shed had been repainted white. On the gate, she hung a small wooden sign that read, "The Wynn Garden, a place to heal." Dr. Hart visited often, helping her organize volunteer programs for women recovering from loss. Children came too, painting small rocks to line the path. Their laughter filled the air, and for the first time since her mother's passing, Clara felt the kind of peace that did not need to be earned. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped low, she saw a familiar car pull up to the gate. Her heart skipped. Adrian stepped out, wearing the same calm smile that had steadied her once in a church full of whispers. "You came back," she said, unable to hide the warmth in her voice. "I promised I would," he said, "and I heard there was a garden I had to see for myself." She led him down the path. Flowers brushed against their hands as they walked. He stopped near the old oak tree, where a single bench faced the river. "It is beautiful," he said quietly. "You made this happen." "We made this happen," she corrected. "You gave me the courage to start." He looked at her, his expression unreadable for a moment, then softened. "You gave me something too. You reminded me what purpose feels like." They sat together, watching the water catch the orange light of the sunset. The air smelled of lavender and rain, just like the day they met. Clara turned toward him. "You know, I used to think healing meant forgetting, but now I think it means remembering without pain." Adrian nodded slowly. "Maybe healing is just another word for forgiveness, especially the kind you give yourself." They fell silent again, but it was the kind of silence that spoke. Between them lay everything unspoken, yet deeply understood: the shared losses, the resilience, the quiet affection that had grown like roots beneath their grief. When the first stars appeared, Clara stood and handed him a small flower she had picked earlier, a white lily, her mother's favorite. "For the first bloom," she said. He accepted it with a small, reverent smile. "Then this garden has already done its work." As they walked back toward the gate, the wind carried the scent of blossoms behind them. The Wynn garden glowed in the twilight, alive with color and second chances. And in that fading light, two souls who had once been strangers understood that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories begin not with a spark, but with the quiet persistence of something choosing to grow again. Autumn returned quietly to Fairhaven. The air grew crisp, and the garden changed its colors. Lavender faded to silver, marigolds turned bronze, and the wind carried the scent of fallen leaves. Clara spent most mornings tending the last blooms, wrapping the roots to protect them from the coming frost. Adrian had stayed in town longer than he planned. His visits became routine: morning coffee at the inn, an hour helping at the garden, afternoons spent reviewing foundation plans from a laptop on the porch. No one asked him to stay. He simply did, as if some invisible thread held him there. One afternoon, Clara found him by the old magnolia tree, kneeling beside a new sapling. He was marking the soil carefully, his hands steady but thoughtful. "That one is for you," he said when he saw her watching. "For me?" she asked. He nodded. "You once told me your mother believed kindness made things grow. I wanted to plant something that carries her spirit." "End her down." She looked at the young magnolia tree, small but strong, its leaves glistening in the sunlight. She would have loved that, Clara said softly. Magnolias were her favorite. They stood in silence for a moment, the breeze shifting between them. Then she asked, "You could be anywhere in the world, Adrian. Why are you still here?" He straightened, brushing dirt from his hands. His answer came slowly, honest and unguarded. "For years, I worked to build places that healed other people, but I never stayed long enough to heal myself. Then I met you. This garden, this town, it reminds me that peace is not found in success. It is found in stillness." Clara felt her chest tighten, not from pain this time, but from something gentler. "You make it sound simple," she said. "It is not simple," he replied. "It is just real." The late sunlight flickered through the branches, scattering gold across the path. She looked at him, really looked: the scar on his hand, the quiet in his eyes, the steadiness that had carried her through her worst day. "Adrian," she said, her voice almost a whisper, "you were a stranger who saved me once. But you became something I did not expect. You became home." He took a small step closer, the air between them thick with unspoken feeling. "Clara, The day I walked out of that church with you, I told myself it was just to help someone in pain. But somewhere along the way, helping you became healing me." She blinked back tears, a trembling smile breaking through. "Are you saying what I think you are saying?" He reached for her hand, his touch warm and deliberate. "I'm saying that I love you, not because I saved you, but because you saved me from living half a life." Her breath caught. The world felt still, as if the garden itself was holding its breath. She squeezed his hand, eyes shining. "I love you too, Adrian, for everything you are and everything you helped me remember I could be." For a long moment, they stood beneath the magnolia tree, surrounded by the scent of earth and leaves. The wind carried a single petal between them, and Adrian tucked it gently behind her ear. In that simple gesture, the years of loss and loneliness folded into something whole again. Not a rescue, not a replacement, just love, steady and quiet, like roots finding their place in the soil. When the sun finally slipped beyond the trees, he whispered, "Do you think your mother would approve?" Clara smiled through tears. She would have said the garden bloomed just in time. They stood hand in hand, the magnolia tree swaying above them, its roots beginning to take hold just like their hearts, anchored by kindness, watered by forgiveness, and finally, growing towards something they both believed in again. Winter arrived softly in Fairhaven. Frost touched the edges of the garden, and the air carried the scent of pine and distant smoke. The Wynn garden stood quiet but alive, its paths lined with lanterns, its benches dusted with snow. Where flowers once danced, small lights now glowed like stars on the ground. It had been nearly a year since that terrible wedding day, yet Clara no longer measured her life by what she lost. She measured it by what she had built. The garden had become a refuge for many a place where grief met grace, where silence became strength. Women came from nearby towns to plant, to paint, to breathe again. Children played among the rows of lavender, their laughter soft as prayer. Adrian stood near the magnolia tree, watching as Clara spoke to a small crowd gathered for the Foundation's winter event. Her voice carried gently through the cold air. "This garden began as a promise to myself, to my mother, and to anyone who ever felt broken. We cannot always choose what life gives us, but we can choose what we grow from it." Applause rippled through the group, and when her eyes met his, the rest of the world disappeared. After the guests left, the two of them walked slowly through the empty garden. The snow crunched beneath their boots. The magnolia tree stood tall now, its branches bare but strong, waiting for spring. Adrian stopped and turned toward her. "Do you remember what you said the day we planted this tree?" She smiled faintly. "That I wanted it to stand for kindness." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Then let it stand for another promise, too." Clara froze as he opened it. Inside was a simple silver ring, shaped like a vine curling around a petal. "Adrian," he took her hand gently. "This time, I am not here to rescue you. I am here to walk beside you. Will you marry me, Clara Wynn?" Her eyes filled with tears, not from sadness but from the fullness of everything they had endured. "Yes," she whispered. 1,000 times, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and for a moment, the whole world felt still, the garden, the river, the stars above. The past no longer hurt. It had turned into soil where something real could grow. Clara leaned against him, her voice soft. "You once told me life gives us who we need, not what we expect." "Oh," he smiled. "And sometimes it gives us both." Snow began to fall again, light as ash, settling on their shoulders. The magnolia tree swayed gently behind them, its roots deep, its branches reaching upward. And under that winter sky, surrounded by the garden that had healed them both, Clara and Adrian began the rest of their story, proof that even from pain, love can take root, bloom, and endure every season that follows.